Hello and welcome back, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Quite a bit of news today in terms of economic and levy updates, or the levy update was yesterday, and so we're going to be going through it today. Really big changes, but relatively short detail. You can see that this post is rather short, and also we are going to be reading through the levy post, and it's not very long, but I think we might spend a little bit of time on discussion because some of these changes make a really big deal. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Hello and welcome to another Tinto Talks. He capitalized the welcome, but he doesn't wish us a happy Wednesday. What's going on here? Alright, fair enough. Happy Wednesday, everyone. Where we talk about what we are doing with EU5. Tomorrow, we will release 1.0.7, which will include some fixes to levies, which we will go over after this, further improvements to killing off of privateers, and crash fixes, our personal favorite. We are still working with fixing issues you have reported and making sure that as many possible are solved every week. And so, still in post-release mode where the primary concern is fixing of bugs and this type of thing, especially as a lot of eyes get on the game, a lot more bugs can get exposed, and also they have a backlog of bugs reported as well from content creators. So they're busy polishing kind of more and more of the game, but of course the game is very fun on release. So let's talk about the 3 interesting changes for next week, and these are pretty big, especially the economic base one. So economic base, this is something that's got negative feedback in how it's calculated. You on the forums, yeah, you guys are big mad, which to be fair, I think it should be calculated differently, but I wasn't expecting this curveball, so the system really needs to be reworked. Before, the issue was basically that the economic base was calculating your total tax base plus the buy price of your trades, and what this meant is often you could get underwater on trades in terms of the tax base or the economic base informs your costs. If your costs are, let's say, 20% of the economic base, then that means for every trade to be positive in value, you need to generate revenue on that trade that is equal to 5x its contribution to the economic base if you're just thinking about the government budget, right? And what would happen is you would start to get trades where the amount they were contributing to the tax base was in excess of the amount that they were contributing to, your trade revenue, let alone your share of trade. So, for example, if we were exporting fine cloth and we were getting 1 ducat on that export, but the price of fine cloth, the buy price of the trade, was at 3 ducats, it would add 3 ducats to the economic base, and then we would get 1 ducat in terms of trade. And so if our expenses were 20%, we would be getting 0.6 in expenses because 20% of 3. Right? And then if we only had, let's say, 33% crown power, we would be earning on that trade 33% of the trade revenue, because the rest goes to the estates, 6.7. So we would be making 0.33 off the trade. And then the trade, we would be getting increase in our slider expenses of 0.6. And so we would be underwater by 0.27 ducats. And for some people who really push trade quite aggressively, entirely turning off their trade would make them have a better net income. Of course, this comes at the expense of, your income to your estates and some other nuances. But the main idea is that the scaling was weird. And so while that scaled nicely, it also made the trade far less beneficial than it should be, and also made building up your tax base not always great. Yes, this is true. If you are underwater on your income, so let's say, just thinking of tax base, if you are taxing 25% of the tax base and then your sliders are 30%, it's actually always better to have a smaller economy. So in theory, you would want to somehow scale down the size of your economy in some instances. Okay, so the scaling is a little bit weird. So for next patch, instead, we are going to be basing the economic, now going to be basing the economic base on 3 different factors, which isn't going to include trade at all, which I find very, very strange. So trade is going to be entirely plus EV. So the heuristic, I've been kind of mentioning a little bit of wanting to expand trade as long as your worst trade is making a ducat, over a ducat, just kind of being a general heuristic, because if you have that, your trades on average will probably be 2 ducats plus. With this, your tax base, your subject's tax base, and your population, with it being 50% of your tax base, 10% of your subject's tax base, and 0.01 ducats for each 1,000 pops you have. That means trade's back on the menu, boys, and trade is just going to be way more profitable, because it will be purely plus EV, unless they accidentally left out of this dev diary that it's going to somehow scale with trade whatsoever. Trade income just seems like free money, right? Because your trade income doesn't scale up your expenses. What economic base is doing is it is scaling up your expenses. Your expenses are based on the economic base, and so when you get income that also increases your economic base, like tax, this means that you have to pay more for your cost of court slider, your stability slider, etc. So, but, okay, what does the change mean for us? Well, 50% of our tax base, this means that the tax base scaling is half what it was before. That is huge. And I think overall, as a consequence, the net effect of this is actually going to be economies are going to be way faster, and they're already really fast. And so getting a really positive margin is going to be much easier, because before it was like, okay, we get 40% of our tax base in tax, and then we are going to be having slider expense of 10%, and it's like, all right, fair enough. But now the slider expense is effectively, that would be 10% slider, is effectively 5% slider, so it really speeds up your margins, especially if your margins were small. If you were generating 30% in tax relative to the tax base, and then you were paying 20% on sliders, then your margin's about 10% of your total economic base, right, in terms of your net income. But now, if that 10% effectively becomes 5%, or sorry, if that 20% effectively becomes 10%, it's like doubling your net income, right? And so the slimmer your margins, the more you like paying for sliders, the bigger a buff this is going to be in terms of net income. It's going to incentivize more slider play. Currently, I think you kind of just kill your sliders, and to be fair, the people who are having issues with the trades largely were paying a lot for sliders, and that makes it a lot easier to be underwater, and I think that was one of the issues. But okay, 10% of your subjects' tax base, this makes sense. You get, for most of your subjects, not all of them, you get 20% of your income, or of their income. And so, but here's the thing, is they're actually pretty bad at max fully taxing everyone, and so this is probably going to make it so that subjects are costing you money. I have a sneaking suspicion, because if your subjects are taxing 20% of the tax base, or let's call it 30% of the tax base. Let's say they have 100 ducats in terms of the tax base, so they're taxing 30 ducats, and then you get 20% of that, so you get 6 ducats, and then their tax base is 100, and so this increases your tax base by 10. So your tax base is increased by 10. And so instead of subjects being pure gravy, if your tax base is increased by 10 and your expenses yourself are 20%, instead of making 6 ducats, you'll effectively be making net 4 ducats, right? Because your increased economic base, increasing your cost sliders by 2, effectively, because 20% of 10 is 2, and then minus the 6 you're getting off of them, so like a third reduction with the math that we use there, in terms of subjects, what you're going to be getting from subjects. So, subjects are going to be worse, in terms of how much they're applying. This, incidentally, a lot of people have been complaining about France, like, kind of the big bad. France has a lot of subjects, and they get a lot of subject income, and so this is going to be a pretty painful nerf to them, as well, if they are losing, effectively speaking, a third of that. Although, I don't know what the math will typically work out to be. I don't know if it'll typically be a third. I'm just offering that up as an example. And then finally, 0.01 ducats for each 1,000 pops you have. And this is huge, because this is a nerf to high pop nations. Now, this is not super aggressive scaling, but let's take, for example, I think Delhi starts around with 45 million. Let's call it 50 million pops, right? And so, if we do 50,000, that's 0.05 ducats, and then if we add some zeros, in terms of the scaling, to get up to 5 million ducats from 50,000, I think that's 2 zeros, so that'll be 0.05 to 5 ducats per 5 million, and so for 10 of that is 50 ducats to the tax base. That doesn't seem too aggressive a scaling, right? 50 ducats added to the tax base by virtue of having 50 million pops. And so this seems rather conservative, but it also just seems like a straight nerf to high pop nations, which I think in general are just incredibly strong. And I do think this is really kind of a reasonable thing, because high pop really high pop really stimulates the economy really, really strongly in a way that I think that people are not fully realizing. And if you play Vigianagar, you're like, wow, I'm popping off, I'm so rich, but understanding the connection between why you're rich and this type of stuff is maybe not so clear, because your pops are going to let you build higher building levels, so you will get more of the better buildings, and you will also be able to build to higher economies of scale. This is true, but your pops are also informing what the demand in the market is, and so not only can you build more buildings in your urban areas, and your rural areas too, for that matter, because you have more pops, you are also getting way more demand, and so you can have more buildings at a higher profit margin before you push the price down and the building becomes unprofitable. And this is really, really powerful, and it's not like this is going to make it bad to have high pop. High pop is still going to be insane. I don't think this is anywhere near a large enough effect to be doing this, unless we did the math just ridiculously wrong. But if we have 100,000 pops, that's one ducat, right? And that's just not... That's not a lot. If we have 1 million pops, that's 10 ducats. If we have 10 million pops, that's 100 ducats to the tax base. That's virtually nothing. If anything, I think this maybe should scale with age, where it's 0.01 per age or something like this is added to the tax base. I think that would probably be more sensible, and that this is just small and you could make this number much larger. But putting that aside, we do see some scaling that is diminishing the power of high pops. It's just not, I think, that strong a factor. But continuing on, at the same time now, we will restore trade maintenance to the intended size, which is, I don't know what they mean by intended size, whether this is the 10x number or the 1/10 number. I assume it's back to the 1/10 number. Or when they have this patch go through, trade maintenance will be 10x'd. Okay, this makes sense, because you won't be forced underwater by the buy price of your trades increasing your economic base. So they are transferring the cost of trades from this economic base creation, increasing your slider expense. They're transferring it from this to trade maintenance, which is good, because trade maintenance is kind of a deadish modifier right now. But okay, moving on, combat tooltips. To be brutally honest, the tooltips we had on regiments in combat were rather bad and confusing, yes. And some of these things were completely hidden, yeah. Now you will be able to see which section the regiment is in, which section the target is in. You will also be able to chance of joining the main sections if in the reserves, and the chance of using initiative to engage. So we're going to be seeing a bunch more things, and this is great. We've also been working how we display the damage a regiment does as well, so that it'll be more clear with the multiplier to the left, the actual number changed to the decimal to the right, yay for decimals on soldiers. So hopefully, yeah, hopefully we actually get a decimal over here. But as you can see, the way that initially, when I first saw this UI, I actually thought it was a little bit confusing, and then it started to make a little bit more sense, is these are just applying these percentage modifiers. They're all multiplicative with each other, so now it's more clear that everything's applying multiplicatively, and we know that discipline and tactics are applied multiplicatively with each other in terms of damage reduction and not additively, but also seeing it through here, we are going to have start with a base of 12, and then plus 15% is added, and then minus 60% is applied, and then minus 61% is applied, and this is the marginal change of each of these. So when you add it all up, you will get your total net damage done, and we will see that this will be 13 minus 5, or minus 8 is 5, minus 3 is 2, and roughly 2 damage will be done, but paradox math and rounding and this type of stuff and decimal places, etc. And so this is going to be a change that is going to be coming in. And then centralization versus decentralization. As it stands with the balance, I haven't read through this right now, but as it stands with the balance, centralization is unambiguously the best value. It's not even remotely close. And decentralization, it's not that it's bad, it's that it's completely unviable in the face of centralization being so good. Decentralization as a value is actually quite strong. But one meta that appeared was that centralization was always superior. Yes, so we decided to rework the societal value to be a distinct choice and less of a no-brainer. Alright, so are we doing this with subject loyalty? We rework subject loyalty, okay. So that a significant part of what is used to be the base value is now impacted by the societal value, where if you want to have a lot of subjects, it's probably beneficial to be decentralized. Ugh. Ugh. That's fair enough. I was kind of... So for those of you who play Victoria 3, a lot of people are mad that interventionism relative to laissez-faire has just basically been always worse. I don't know the current status of things right now because you could give out monopolies and maybe interventionism's okay, but I'm talking about the just general history. It's just been strictly worse than laissez-faire. And I've never had a problem with this because generally speaking, I've always viewed this as a different starting condition that is like a different version of traditionalism, which is very clearly always worse. And so what I viewed centralization as was a sort of starting condition of how easy it is to get to centralization, and it's never really bothered me that centralization is always better. I think that to some extent people get like video game brained, where everything needs to be balanced relative to one another, and there needs to be a trade-off, and something can't just be strictly better, or not strictly better, but just better in general. And I'm actually fine with this as a play pattern. But that said, I also don't mind making decentralization a lot better, because I think that that's fine and fair. And okay. We also made it so that the diplomatic ability of rulers impacts your subjects' loyalty. Yikes. A little bit of a yikes. From a play perspective, from a simulation perspective, I think this is great. But this means you're going to sometimes occasionally expand a little, get a few extra subjects with a high dip ruler, and then your ruler dies, and then suddenly you're, like, everyone's low loyalty. And so that'll be a little bit interesting. I hope that this impact is not enormous. But if it is, that's honestly probably a good simulation, so I think we're okay with it. And so that's all for this week, but we have a lot more coming every week, so stay tuned. So, some big changes here. I think the biggest one is the economic-based scaling, because I think that the economies are just going to get way faster. And I mean, I don't think I like the economies getting way faster, but that's kind of like the current balance that they're looking at. But I do like that the subject's tax base is not full gravy, the duck population is getting nerfed a little bit, and that are transferring the scaling or the expenses of trades from increases to economic base to trade maintenance is the idea. But let's talk about levies versus regulars at this point in time. One of the challenges, and this is from today, and this will go live tomorrow, one of the challenges and problems, or by tomorrow I mean like in 12 hours or something like this, because tomorrow for Sweden, or Spain rather, one of the challenges and problems was that was still around with 1.0.2 slash 1.0.4, I assume that means 1.0.4, was the scaling of levies versus regulars and the scaling of levies throughout the ages. 1.0.5 was an attempt to address three different problems. One, levies were always stronger than regulars for the first ages, as 1,000 men versus 100, 200, or 400 men, no matter what, had issues. Yep, the levies would just stomp them out. Two, there was no difference in quality quality of levies for the first there was no difference in quality between quality of levies for the first three ages, making the improved ones worse. Yes, apparently this was, like, supposed to be applying, but wasn't applying correctly, and so, strictly speaking, researching some texts would downgrade your levy's fighting capability. And three, anything impacting levy combat efficiency did nothing, as the values were capped at 100%, and 1,000 men was 100% already, and so, combat efficiency just straight up did not apply. So we made a manpower and levies actually scale how good they are versus regular at the same age, which together, with the fixed levies fight at 50%, made the 1000k regiment fought at a 95% penalty, basically making them useless in the first stage. And not very good thereafter either. So this is kind of what the patch is currently, is that levies just get absolutely full diced. And not in the, like, shredded, like, buff type of way. They get diced the, like, you dice a ham type of way. So, just died very, very quickly. I spent most of the day yesterday on a revised system so that it feels far better. We're testing it heavily now, and there should be in tomorrow's 1.0.7 update. So how will this work? We made it so that every levy type has a 0.2 multiplier that increases by 0.5 every age, 0.05 every age rather. So age of discovery, a levy will have 0.3, and that is increased by levy combat efficiency. So levy combat efficiency will be able to bring the multiplier, I guess, to the cap of 1 that they were talking about earlier, or 100%. So we can see male knights are going to be having... Do we get to see this modifier? Okay, so Levy combat efficiency versus regulars in Age 1, and so it is clear now in the UI that upgrading this to the next level knight will give us 0.25 instead, and then is modified by various modifiers for Kingdom of France, France getting some modifiers, and then we see the efficiency in battle is going to be 400%, or sorry, 40% in total, multiplied by the number of men, and so it's going to be multiplied effectively by the number of men, and so this is still, the mailed knights, 500 mailed knights is still going to outperform, right, like a regular, a cavalry regular, which is going to be a 50 unit size, that's not going to have penalties here. And there's also the discipline penalty that all levies get, and they can't get experience and this type of stuff. But in the aggregate, 40% of 500 is still 200, right? And so they will effectively still be more powerful in Age 1, which is intended. But the thing is, in Age 2, we'll get up to 0.25%, so this will be 25% higher, right? Or the multiplier will be 0.25, this will get 25% higher, so it'll be 50% efficiency, but it'll still be applying to this 500 unit strength, so it'll effectively be like 250, the strength of a 250 unit size, but the size of the unit each age doubles for the regulars, and so the regulars, instead of punching at 100 versus 200, the effective in Age 1, in Age 2, it's going to be effectively 50 versus 200, it will effectively be 100 versus 250, and then in Age 3, when this is a 0.3 multiplier getting turned into 60% applied to 500 units, right, it will be effectively the equivalent of a 300 unit regular, and then with that being applied, at the same time, the regulars will be unit sizes of 200 at that point, and 200 versus 300, when you are getting extra discipline and have the opportunity for experience in this type of stuff, the Age 3 levies and regulars should be roughly on par, and then Age 4 regulars should be better, because the units keep doubling in size on a kind of per unit basis, and this is, I think, kind of what's intended in a much smoother curve than what we've been seeing so far, where either... And what I'm saying, what we've been seeing so far, even extending towards the April version of the pre-release game that I had access to, which is that generally it's been hyper swingy, where levies are either OP or useless, and this seems like it's going to be a much smoother transition based on kind of just like quick mathing it, although the proofs of the pudding, we do have to get in the game and check this stuff out. So the French levies here will be fighting at 40% of the power, which is slightly worse than the 1.0.4 that had a flat 50% here, but also scales better. So why does France... So what does the 100% from France come from here? We are going to be getting this from Auxilium et Concilium, which is a noble estate privilege. We're getting it from nobility estate power, and then we're also getting it from the noble levies law, which is also tied to monarchies. So we're going to see levies continue to be stronger for monarchies. We did make a little bit of a video about that. But also, if you're going for republic, you're going to have better opportunities to raise... regulars in the form of mercenaries, and those regulars are going to also fare fairly well as well. A very strong nobility, some privileges, the nobility law helps them out, and also France has they have like a unique privilege and a unique tech, or maybe it's 2 unique privileges. I think it's a privilege and a tech that gives them like plus 150% noble levy size. So they not only have this combat efficiency, but they have way bigger numbers on the levies. But now some of you can do some maths and think, certainly not us. Age of Revolutions will have a 0.45 combat efficiency, and if I stack over 122 levy combat efficiency, I can get them to be better than regulars. Well, but they're not going to be getting experience or be able to have experience as well, and you're going to get the discipline penalty. However, as you can see here, as the penalties are applied, as the ages go up on combat... However, as you can see here, there are penalties as ages go up to combat efficiency. So we see modified to... Okay. Total efficiency in battle will be 60%. This modifier has gone down. And then what do we see? Age of Revolutions is going to give minus 60%. Okay, this is fair enough. Is this minus 60% additive? It does look like it's additive. So stacking a bunch of these modifiers will still be useful, especially if it's helping you to overcome one of these like 60% modifiers. And in fact, they'll be super essential. If you can imagine not having this noble levies law, that would decrease your combat efficiency by, oh my, no wait. No, they're stacking additively. It's just, okay, it's plus 100% minus 60%. And so, if we were to lose the Noble's estate power, we would go from 140% total power to like 90% total power. So that would be an absolute throttling. So the more of these you have, the less effective they are proportionately. But there's a small enough number of these modifiers that stacking combat efficiency on levies should be relatively strong, even if you're getting this huge minus penalty, because it's not applying multiplicatively, right? This appears to be applying additively. And so that will be kind of the changes in levies, where we can expect them to be stronger the first 2 ages, maybe even balanced in the 3rd age, and weaker by age 4, which I think is kind of the design intent behind these. And so hopefully these systems kind of smooth it out and make it much more even-handed, where you will be able to make use of both professionals and levies ages 1 to 5. Age 6, it's probably going to be like all professionals, rather than them just feeling stone dead useless in certain ages. Especially previously the professionals have just felt a god-awful in the first 3 ages, and so this does seem to be quite a bit better. But that's the news we had for today. Big changes to economy and levies. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, honk your horn outside the loud car. And other than that, y'all have a good one. Bye-bye now.